What's going on, people? My name is Aaron, aka The Anxious Investor, bringing you a property update video in the middle of May, talking about the housing market and what's going on in 2021. Now, as the title suggests, the housing market is a mess, and I could literally end this video with that, with 99% of you probably agreeing. We are seeing houses fly off the shelves within seconds of going up for sale. We are also seeing some houses not even make it that far and being sold way beforehand, which I know has always kind of been the case, at least in some circumstances, but the more agents I speak to within my circle, the more they're saying that houses are actually being sold way before they ever hit the online portals like Rightmove and Zoopla that you and I, us mere mortals, are familiar with. Now the problem is, when houses do make it onto the internet, a bidding war happens, and that just further increases prices. It's almost becoming like an auction without the auction process, seeing buyers compete with one another to buy a property. And we all know what happens when supply is limited and demand is high. Essentially, prices increase. And then you sprinkle on a little bit of emotion and we have people buying without logic. One of my number one pet peeves. However, as I have said in many of my other videos, I do still believe stamp duty and furlough are two big contributors to keeping the housing market where it is. First time buyers are trying to get in before stamp duty holiday ends, having them acting like some folk were acting like last year with the toilet roll scenario. And it's almost as if people are convinced, or at least convincing themselves, that saving on stamp duty almost makes it okay to buy a house at an elevated price. However, we can't just blame first time buyers here, who are causing a little bit of a stir. There are also some people who have a lot of cash, and I mean a lot of cash, who are buying up stock too. And many of them also know that they're not buying it at the best initial price, but they know that they're buying it for the long run. And I guess that quote about time in the market beats time in the market, I suppose it kind of rings true, or at least that's how they convince themselves. And although I get that to some degree, it does feel like a lot of logic of how I, as an investor, or maybe you guys would analyze deals and purchase them has simply gone out the window. But it's remarkable that house prices ended last year at 7.3% higher than they started, according to a nationwide article. And to further add to that, we also saw stats that 103,000 mortgage approvals for home purchases in December 2020 made it the highest December figure since 2006, which kind of explains why my broker's been a little bit slower. And in case you're curious, here's a table showing house price growth against rental growth too, from Savills Research using the Land Registry and HomeTrack. So I suppose the question is, will we see a crash like we've seen in the past during the property cycles? That is the $1 million question, isn't it? That's what's having people split with their opinions. Some people will argue till their face turns red and even end up disliking some of my videos about this topic, that it simply won't crash. Whereas there's others, a little bit like myself, who think that it's just not feasible, or we can't comprehend how sustainable this is going to be for prices to remain where they are, or at least continue going up. However, one thing we can all agree on is that things are different this time. This is the first time we have actually seen house prices rise whilst the economy itself has shrunk. And as we saw GDP fall dramatically last year and unemployment continued to rise, for some reason the housing market had a mind of its own and it just continued to rise, and in my opinion, just become an absolute mess. Now, as an investor, I am seeing very little value in the market at this particular time. And even as a potential home buyer, I have to warn you, at least please try and consider the possibility of negative equity should a correction happen. It may not, and I hope for your sake it doesn't, but please do check that. And I'll also quickly stress here that lenders won't just lend you the mortgage amount on a property because you simply offered on it. But that's still not stopping people increasing their initial deposits, or maybe going for alternatives like using the government help to buy scheme to get their foot on the ladder, which I think I've made my views pretty clear about in many of the videos over here. So if that's of interest, please do check that out, as I do try and look at it from a neutral standpoint, just to kind of advise you all. So anyways, back to what we're seeing in 2021 in the housing market. What's actually going to happen when the government stops its support? And to add a random problem on top of that, currently we also know, and I need to know this as I'm going into development this year, is building materials are going through the roof as well. So making houses is essentially going to become more expensive. You're essentially going to see home builders looking to charge more for their houses, but then we must ask the question of what happens to the population when their spending power collapses when the government stops their support. it's going to cause further problems. Will we then see developers crumble or maybe not develop? And how is the housing market going to keep going should this happen? I, for one, I'm not entirely sure, and that's the truth of it. I still stand by practicing some patience and waiting for Q4 of this year to see if we get any sort of correction or normality at least, before at least I go out there and shop for deals. But I will also say that I am also very, very fortunate that if house prices don't drop and they continue to stay where they are or rise, we have over 20 plus new build units coming in 2022. So for me, it's kind of a win-win situation. If they drop, however, as an investor, opportunities arise. But either way, it really is a complete mess on the whole scale for many of you. And I guess that's the reason for this video, was to kind of get your opinions on where do you see the housing market going? What are you thinking is going to happen towards the end of this year or even in the next few months? Can we sustain these prices or at least hold them where they currently are? Or will a correction take place and will we see more repossessions, transactions falling through, maybe developers going bust and opportunities arise for those who have the fattest wallets? And that's not me, sadly. Either way, it's going to be testing times, and as I always say, please, please, please do be cautious. And where feasible, try and apply as much logic as possible and really think about the worst case scenarios that can potentially occur. And with that, my friends, I'm going to end the video here. So it's just a very short update, and I thank you all for taking time out of your day today, and I'm going to roll some bloopers now, hopefully for you all to giggle at. And I suppose the final question is, what's actually more of a mess, my bloopers or the housing market? Have a good one. Now, the problem with now, and that just in my, but knowing that they're like we've seen,